The krill did not understand. They were a tapestry woven from a billion silken threads, each thread a krill, each thought a ripple across the collective. Individuality to them was a fraying edge, a weakness. Emotions, as experienced by the solitary beings they sometimes encountered, were static, a cacophony of useless noise. Of all these noises, the one they found most perplexing, most indicative of primitive fragility, was grief. They had observed it in other species, a shutting down, a cessation of productive activity, a descent into irrationality. It was, their unified mind concluded, a critical design flaw. Humanity, a species teeming on the vibrant blue world designated Terra, and its fledgling colonies, was riddled with this flaw. Their social structures were built on individual attachments, their art and stories obsessed with love and loss. The krill, in their cold, collective logic, saw this as a vector for swift and efficient subjugation. Target the attachments, induce widespread grief, and the human will would crumble. It was a sound, tactical assessment, backed by millennia of observing lesser, emotional beings. The colony of Veridia Prime was one such soft target. Nestled in a fertile valley on a newly terraformed moon, Veridia was an agricultural hub, its inhabitants more farmers and families than soldiers. They had a small defense militia, more for keeping local megafauna out of the soybean fields than for interstellar war. Their lives were about growth, community, and the laughter of children, precisely the kind of attachments the krill deemed exploitable. When the krill scout ships, like obsidian shards against Veridia's twin suns, first appeared, there was fear, of course. But there was also a human tendency the krill had no framework for, a stubborn, almost foolish hope. Evacuation protocols were initiated for non-essential personnel, but many stayed. This was their home. They had poured their sweat and dreams into its soil. The krill invasion was not a subtle affair. Drop pods like metallic rain slammed into the outskirts of Prosperity, Veridia's main settlement. Krill warriors, chitinous bodies gleaming, multi-jointed legs scuttling with unnerving speed, emerged. They were armed with neurodisruptors that induced paralysis, their preferred method of pacification. The local militia, brave but outmatched, fought to buy time. Men and women who had yesterday been debating crop rotation schedules now held laser rifles, their faces grim. Then came the act designed to shatter them. The broodmother Varth, her bulbous, intelligent mind overseeing the pacification from her command vessel, identified a central, brightly painted structure near the settlement's heart. The Veridia Children's Academy. It pulsed with the kind of concentrated emotional energy the krill found so distasteful, and therefore so vulnerable. Through her collective, Varth instructed a squadron of warrior drones. Target the structure designated school, her thought command rippled. Broadcast its destruction across all local human communication frequencies. Observe and record the resultant systemic emotional collapse. It will accelerate their surrender. The attack was brutally efficient. Plasma bolts, emerald green and searing, struck the school. The cheerful murals of cartoon animals and smiling suns vaporized. The light frame building, designed more for inspiration than defense, buckled and imploded. Debris, carrying the scent of incinerated learning materials and something achingly innocent, rained down. The krill drones, as instructed, ensured their shipboard sensors captured every moment, broadcasting the footage on a loop to every active comm screen in Prosperity, to every militia member's helmet display. Corporal Eva Rostova, taking cover behind an overturned hydroponics planter, saw it. Her rifle clattered from suddenly numb fingers. Her son, 8-year-old Leo, with his gap-toothed grin and his obsession with drawing spaceships, had been in that school. He was supposed to be learning about the native flora of Veridia today. Sergeant Marcus Cole, coordinating a desperate defense at the settlement's perimeter, watched the broadcast on his wristcom. His daughter, Lily, who had just lost her first tooth and had proudly shown it to him via video call that morning, had loved her teacher, Miss Anya. They were both in there. His breath hitched. The world tilted. The krill awaited the expected outcome. Despair, surrender, the cessation of organized resistance. Varth anticipated the satisfying silence of a broken enemy. Instead, something else happened. For a moment, there was a silence, yes, but it was not the silence of surrender. It was the silence of a deep, collective breath being drawn. It was the sound of 1,000 hearts stopping, then restarting with a beat that was no longer just about life, but about something ancient and terrible. Eva Rostova picked up her rifle. The world that had tilted now snapped into a focus so sharp it hurt. The green of the krill plasma, the grey of their chitin, the red of her own blood seeping from a graze on her arm, it was all hyperreal. But the image seared into her mind, the one that eclipsed everything else, was the crumbling ruin of the school. Leo's laugh, his small hand in hers, the way he'd wrinkle his nose when he concentrated on his drawings, these things were not gone. They were transmuted. The love, the fierce, protective love of a mother, did not shatter. It crystallized. It became a diamond edge of pure, cold rage. Sergeant Cole's voice, when he spoke into his calm, was unrecognizable. It was flat, devoid of its usual warmth, hard as neutronium. "All units," he said. "Targets are krill. All krill, no prisoners, no retreat." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The words resonated with a chilling finality. Across Prosperity, the human defenders, those who had seen, those who had lost, did not break. They did not scatter. The krill, observing through their drones, saw not disarray, but a horrifying coalescence. Farmers who had fumbled with their weapons now moved with a grim, fluid economy. Mechanics, teachers, shopkeepers, their faces were masks of stone, but behind their eyes burned a light the krill had never witnessed. It wasn't the fleeting, chaotic anger they'd occasionally seen in other species. This was different. This was an engine. The grief, raw and immense, was not a weight that crushed them. It became fuel. Every memory of a child's smile, a loved one's touch, a future stolen, was now a shard of glass in a storm of vengeance. Eva Rostova advanced. She didn't charge wildly. She moved from cover to cover, her shots precise, each one aimed at a krill optical sensor or a vulnerable joint in their armor. When one krill warrior lunged at her, she didn't flinch. She sidestepped its neurodisruptor blast, brought the butt of her rifle up in a brutal arc that cracked its carapace, and fired point-blank into the exposed, pulsating mass beneath. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a terrible, settled purpose. The krill warriors, accustomed to foes who would break or flee when faced with overwhelming force or personal loss, found themselves facing something utterly alien. These humans fought with a ferocity that was suicidal in its intensity, yet terrifyingly coordinated. They took risks no sane soldier would take, exposing themselves to fire to get a better shot, using their own bodies as bait to draw krill into kill zones. But it wasn't chaos. Small units, often led by those who had just lost everything, moved with an intuitive, unspoken understanding. They covered each other, they advanced, they died, but they never, ever stopped. A group of krill, cornered in the marketplace, found themselves surrounded. These were not militia, they were colonists, a retired engineer, a baker whose hands were usually covered in flour, a quiet woman who grew prize-winning roses. They were armed with makeshift weapons. Nail guns modified to fire steel spikes, farming implements sharpened to deadly points, salvaged mining explosives. Their faces were pale, tear-streaked, but their eyes held that same terrifying light. They fought like demons, their attacks relentless, forcing the krill back, step by agonizing step. The krill, for the first time in their collective memory, felt something akin to unease. On her command vessel, Broodmother Voth watched the incoming battle data with growing consternation. Her analytical mind struggled to process the input. Casualty rates for human defenders are exceeding projected attrition models by 700%, one of her subminds reported. Yet, their offensive pressure is increasing. Resistance is not collapsing. It is hardening. Voth focused on a particular combat feed. A human male, his face contorted in a silent scream, was charging a krill-heavy weapons platform. He was armed only with a satchel charge. He was cut down by plasma fire, but not before he hurled the charge. The explosion took out the platform and 3 krill warriors. This was not logical. This was not self-preservation. They are not fighting for survival, Voth thought, a ripple of something cold, almost like the human fear she had dismissed, touching the edges of her collective consciousness. They are fighting to inflict maximum damage. Their losses are not deterring them, they are motivating them. The Krill had expected the destruction of the school to be a scalpel, precisely severing the emotional bonds that held human society together. Instead, it was like striking a hornet's nest with a sledgehammer. The individual stings might be minor, but the sheer, unified swarm of fury was overwhelming. Eva Rostova found herself fighting alongside Marcus Cole. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They had both seen the same footage. They both carried the same hollow ache, the same burning core of rage. He'd lost his Lily, she'd lost her Leo. Their shared, unspoken agony became a terrible synergy. He drew fire, she took the kill shot. She reloaded, he covered her. They were a two-person wave of retribution, cutting through Krill ranks. The fighting lasted for 18 brutal hours. The Krill, with their superior numbers and technology, should have secured prosperity within the first 3. But they hadn't accounted for the grief engine. They hadn't understood that for humans, some losses didn't break the spirit. They forged it into something unbreakable, something terrifyingly focused. Krill warriors began to hesitate. Their collective mind, usually a source of strength and flawless coordination, started to experience flickers of confusion. Their tactics, based on predictable enemy responses, were failing. How do you demoralize an enemy that draws strength from its own despair? How do you pacify a foe whose every loss only deepens their resolve to make you pay? The turning point came when a small group of human defenders, led by a gaunt-faced woman who had been the school's principal, managed to reactivate an old seismic surveying charge left over from the initial terraforming. They rigged it in the ruins of the town hall, directly beneath a concentration of Krill command units. It was a suicide mission. They knew it. They armed it and detonated it as Krill warriors breached their position. The resulting explosion ripped the heart out of the Krill's ground command and took the last of those brave, broken defenders with it. Broodmother Varth, witnessing this latest act of irrational self-destruction for maximal enemy damage, finally understood. Or rather, her collective mind recoiled from a truth it could not comfortably assimilate. These humans were not like other emotional species. Their grief was not a weakness. It was a catalyst for a terrifying metamorphosis. They were transforming profound sorrow into an unyielding, almost holy rage. "Withdraw," Varth commanded, the order echoing through the Krill collective with an uncharacteristic urgency. "All units, disengage and withdraw. Abandon the pacification of Veridia Prime." Her subminds registered confusion. "Broodmother, we still hold tactical superiority in several sectors. The enemy is expending itself at an unsustainable rate." "Their rate of expenditure is irrelevant," Varth projected, the image of the burning school and the subsequent, horrifying human response seared into her multifaceted consciousness. "We have miscalculated the emotional variable. Severely. Continued engagement will result in unacceptable losses for the Krill. Their grief, it is not a weakness. It is a weapon we do not understand and cannot counter." The Krill retreat was as swift as their attack had been. They disengaged, their warriors scuttling back to their drop ships, leaving behind their dead and the smoldering ruins of prosperity. They did not look back. The surviving humans of Veridia Prime did not cheer. They stood, smoke-stained and bloodied, amidst the wreckage of their homes and their lives. The fire of their rage had burned away their tears, leaving behind a cold, hard emptiness and a grim resolve. They had held. They had paid an unimaginable price. Eva Rostova and Marcus Cole found each other near the perimeter fence as the last Krill ship vanished into the bruised twilight sky. They were both wounded, exhausted beyond measure. Eva leaned against a scorched wall, her rifle still clutched in her hand. Cole sank to his knees. For a long moment, they just breathed, the silence broken only by the crackle of distant fires and the soft sounds of survivors beginning to emerge from the rubble. Then Eva spoke, her voice raspy. "Leo, he loved drawing stars." Cole nodded, his gaze distant. "Lily, she wanted to be a pilot, fly to those stars." The grief was still there, a vast, hollow cavern in their souls. But now something else was there too, a grim, shared knowledge. They had faced the abyss, and the abyss had blinked. News of Veridia Prime and the Krill's sudden, inexplicable retreat spread through the human colonies and eventually reached the wider galaxy. Krill tacticians, in their emotionless post-action analyses, were baffled. They dissected the data, replayed the combat footage, and still, the human response defied their logic. They had encountered species that fought for survival, for territory, for resources. They had never encountered a species that transformed bereavement into such a potent, focused, and utterly terrifying battle rage. A new directive began to circulate within the Krill collective, a warning passed down through their intricate hive mind. Regarding the species designated humanity, avoidance of civilian casualty infliction is paramount. Their emotional response to such losses, particularly concerning their offspring, is unpredictable and generates a disproportionate and strategically untenable level of retaliatory aggression. Do not provoke their mourning. Do not make the humans grieve. The Krill, the emotionless, logical masters of pacification, had learned a new, unwelcome emotion, a cold, lingering dread of human sorrow. And across the stars, a new legend began to form, a warning about a species whose love and loss could fuel an inferno, a species you did not want to push too far, a species for whom grief was not an end, but a terrible beginning.